The cantina on Kepler 7 trading station buzzed with the usual mix of alien voices and clinking glasses. Smoke from a dozen different worlds created a thick haze that hung in the air like fog. In the darkest corner of the room, Zekathera sat alone at a small table. His 4 eyes stared into his 3rd glass of fermented spore wine, watching the purple liquid swirl in the dim light. The old Valthek warrior looked nothing like the proud soldier he once was. His left arm was gone, cut off cleanly at the shoulder. Burned scars covered half his face, leaving the skin rough and discolored. His remaining hand shook slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips. The war had ended 2 cycles ago, but for Zekathera, it never really stopped. A group of young coalition soldiers entered the cantina, their voices loud and confident. They wore fresh uniforms with bright insignia that had never seen real battle. Their weapons gleamed with polish, and their eyes held the eager look of those who had never watched friends die. They spotted Zekathera in his corner and began to whisper among themselves. "Look at that old fool," said Crix, a young Altarian with silver skin and pointed ears. "Drinking alone again." "I heard he lost his unit fighting humans," added Vex, whose blue tentacles writhed with amusement. "Probably ran away when things got tough." The 3rd soldier, a tall Draknari named Zor, laughed. "Humans, those soft pink creatures from the outer rim? What kind of warrior loses to primitives like that?" Their laughter grew louder and other patrons began to stare. Zekathera's grip tightened on his glass, but he said nothing. He had learned that most beings did not want to hear the truth about humans. They preferred their comfortable lies. Crick stood up and walked over to Zekathera's table. His friends followed, forming a circle around the old veteran. "Hey, old-timer," Crick said with a mocking smile. "We heard you fought humans. Tell us, how does it feel to lose to a species that barely knows how to fly between stars?" Zekathera looked up slowly. His remaining eyes were deep and tired like pools of dark water. "You should walk away, younglings. Go find another table to enjoy your drinks." "Why?" Vex asked, his tentacles curling with amusement. "Are you going to tell us scary stories about the big bad humans?" The cantina had grown quiet. Other patrons watched the scene unfold, some recognizing the look in Zekathera's eyes. They had seen that look before in other veterans, other survivors of the Terran War. "I heard humans surrender as soon as they see real soldiers," Zor said, puffing out his chest. "My commander says they cry like infants when faced with superior firepower." Zekathera finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried across the silent room. "Your commander has never faced them in battle. If he had, he would not speak such words." "Come on," Crix pressed. "Tell us what really happened. Did you soil yourself when you saw your first human? Did they scare you with their tiny teeth and soft claws?" The old Valthek was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured to the empty chairs around his table. "Sit down, all of you. If you truly wish to know about humans, I will tell you, but do not blame me for the nightmares that follow." The young soldiers exchanged glances, still smiling. They pulled up chairs and settled around the table, expecting to hear the rambling of a broken old warrior. Other patrons in the cantina leaned closer, some remembering their own encounters with the species from Earth. Zekathera called for another round of drinks. When they arrived, he stared into his glass as if seeing something in the purple liquid that others could not. "You think you know war because you have fought the Kretak hives and the crystal serpents of Andromeda Prime. You have faced enemies with better weapons, stronger armor, faster ships. But you have never faced them." "Them?" Vex asked, his tentacles now still. "Humans," Zekathera said simply. "The only species in the galaxy that we fear to fight directly. Do you know why the Coalition prefers to use economic pressure against Earth? Why we use proxy conflicts and trade wars instead of direct assault?" Zor leaned back in his chair. "Because they are weak and not worth the effort of a real military campaign." Zekathera laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "No, young one. It is because they are the most dangerous enemy any of us have ever faced. Not because of their technology or their numbers, but because of what they are willing to do to win." Crix rolled his eyes. What could they possibly do that other species cannot? "They do not fight like we do," Zekathera said, his voice growing darker. "We fight for territory, for resources, for honor. We follow rules of war that have existed for thousands of years. We try to minimize losses and achieve objectives with the least cost. Humans fight for something else entirely." "What?" Vex asked, his voice now quieter. "They fight to survive, And when a human believes their survival is at stake, they become something that defies everything we know about warfare. Zekthara touched his missing arm. I learned this the hard way. We all did. The young soldiers were no longer smiling. Something in the veteran's voice had changed, becoming deeper and more serious. Around the cantina, other patrons nodded grimly. Many had their own stories about human combat. The first time I encountered humans in battle, I thought it would be simple. Zekthara continued. We had better ships, more soldiers, superior firepower. Our intelligence report said humans were emotional and irrational. They said humans would break easily under pressure. He paused to take another drink. The reports were wrong. Humans are emotional, yes, but that emotion makes them stronger, not weaker. When cornered, when threatened, when facing impossible odds, they do not surrender. They do not retreat. They adapt. Adapt how? Zor asked, no longer sounding confident. Zekthara's eyes grew distant. They turn everything into a weapon. Their tools, their environment, their own bodies. They fight in ways that violate every principle of civilized warfare, and when conventional tactics fail, they invent new ones on the spot. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the background music had stopped, as if the station's AI was listening to the old warrior's words. I will tell you about Proxima Station, Zekthara said slowly, about the 800 humans who held off an entire coalition army for 8 months, about how they turned a mining facility into a fortress of nightmares, about what they did when their ammunition ran out. Crick shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What did they do? Zekthara looked directly at him, and the young soldier saw something in those old eyes that made his blood run cold. It was not anger or hatred. It was fear. Pure, genuine terror that had been burned into the veteran's mind and would never fade. They did whatever it took to win, Zekthara said, and that is why I drink alone in dark cantinas trying to forget. Because once you have seen what humans are capable of when they truly fight, you realize that we are not the apex predators we thought we were. We are just another species that learned too late what happens when you threaten a human's survival. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To the young warriors who think they know war, may you never learn the truth about humans the way I did. The 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence, their earlier confidence completely gone. Around them, the cantina slowly returned to its normal noise level. But the weight of Zekthara's words hung in the air like smoke. They had come looking for entertainment. Instead, they had found something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Zekthara stared at the bottom of his empty glass, watching the last drops of spore wine catch the cantina's dim light. The 3 young soldiers sat across from him, no longer laughing or joking. Their earlier confidence had vanished like smoke, replaced by something that might have been fear or fascination. Around them, other patrons pretended to drink while listening to every word. Proxima Station was supposed to be easy, Zekthara began, his voice barely above a whisper. A simple mining outpost on the edge of human space. 847 humans against 20,000 coalition troops. Our commanders said it would take 3 days at most. Crix leaned forward despite himself. What happened? The old Valthek warrior touched his scarred face with his remaining hand. The siege lasted 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. I know because I counted every single one. He called for another drink, and the nervous bartender quickly brought a full bottle to the table. Zekthara poured carefully, his hand steady now that he was deep in the memory. The station had no military value. It was just a rock floating in space with some mining equipment and a few families. But High Command wanted to make an example, show the humans what happened when they defied coalition authority. Vex's tentacles curled nervously. Surely 800 civilians could not hold off an entire army. That was our mistake, Zekthara said, taking a long drink. Thinking of them as civilians. The coalition military has categories for everything. Soldiers, support staff, non-combatants. We plan our battles around these categories. Humans do not have such divisions when their survival is threatened. The cantina had grown completely silent again. Even the usual background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted, as if the universe itself was listening to the old warrior's tale. We surrounded the station with our fleet. 50 heavy cruisers, 200 fighters, and enough firepower to turn the entire asteroid into dust. But orders were to take it intact, to capture prisoners for interrogation. We thought it would be simple. Send in the troops, accept their surrender, ship them off to detention centers. Zor shifted uncomfortably. Why did you not just destroy it from orbit? Because we did not understand humans yet. Zekthara replied. We thought they were like us. Rational beings who would weigh their options and choose survival over pointless death. We offered them generous surrender terms. Complete amnesty for all civilians, comfortable relocation to other worlds, even compensation for their mining equipment. What was their response? Zekthara's laugh was bitter. They told us to come and take it. Not in those exact words. The actual message contained several human curse words that our translators could not properly convert. He paused to drink again, his eyes growing distant as the memories took hold. The first assault wave was 5,000 troops, elite coalition Marines with the best armor and weapons. We expected to breach their outer defenses within hours. The mining station had no military fortifications, no proper weapon systems, no defense grid. So what went wrong? Crix asked. Everything, Zekthara said simply. The humans had turned their mining equipment into weapons. Ore processors became artillery cannons. Excavation charges became mines. Transport vehicles became armored rams. In 3 days, they had transformed a peaceful mining station into a fortress. Vex's tentacles writhed with nervous energy. But surely your superior numbers and firepower eventually broke through. Zekthara shook his head slowly. Every time we adapted to their defenses, they changed them. They used their mining tunnels to move troops through areas we thought we controlled. They rigged their own life support systems as booby traps. When we cut off their power, they used backup generators. When we destroyed those, they used hand-cranked equipment. The old warrior's voice grew quieter, forcing his listeners to lean closer. After the first month, we controlled 90% of the station. The humans were trapped in the central core with no escape routes. Our intelligence said they had food for maybe 2 weeks. We decided to wait them out rather than waste more troops in the tunnels. That seems logical, Zor said. It would have been against any other species. Zekthara's eyes hardened. But humans do not starve quietly. They began eating things that would poison most other species. They processed their own waste into nutrients. They cannibalized non-essential equipment for trace minerals. The 3 young soldiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was not the kind of warfare they had learned about in training. When their ammunition ran low, they made more from scavenged materials. When they ran out of medical supplies, they performed surgery with mining tools. When soldiers were wounded too badly to fight, they volunteered to become living bombs. Crix's face had gone pale. Living bombs? A human would strap explosives to their body and crawl through ventilation shafts to reach our positions. They would wait until our troops gathered around them, pretending to be dead or dying. Then they would detonate themselves, taking as many of us with them as possible. Zekthara touched his missing arm again, and now his listeners understood why he was no longer whole. I was part of a squad trying to clear the medical bay. We found a human soldier lying in a pool of blood, gut shot and barely breathing. Standard procedure was to check for intelligence, so I approached to search him. The cantina was so quiet that the sound of liquid being poured seemed loud as thunder. He opened his eyes and smiled at me, actually smiled. Then he showed me the grenade in his hand with the pin already pulled. He had been lying there for hours waiting for someone to get close enough. What did you do? Vex whispered. I tried to run, but humans are faster than they look when they are dying. He grabbed my arm with his free hand and held on while he counted down from 5. In perfect coalition standard, so I would understand exactly what was happening. Zekthara flexed his remaining fingers, remembering sensations that no longer existed. I lost my arm just above the elbow. 3 of my squad mates died instantly. The human soldier looked peaceful when it was over, like he had finally completed an important task. The young soldiers sat in horrified silence. This was not the glorious combat they had imagined when they enlisted. By the 6th month, we had taken the entire station except for a single storage room. 23 humans were left alive, and they had no food, no water, and no ammunition. Our commanders were sure they would surrender. Did they? Crix asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. They turned the storage room into one giant explosive device. They were going to bring down the entire central core and kill everyone on the station, including themselves. The only thing that stopped them was the arrival of human reinforcements. Zor blinked in confusion. Reinforcements? But you said the station was surrounded. Zekthara nodded grimly. A human rescue fleet broke through our blockade using tactics that should have been impossible. They lost half their ships doing it, but they saved those 23 survivors. He finished his drink and poured another. The humans who were rescued went back to active duty within 3 months. All of them. The one who had been gut shot was leading assault. team 6 weeks after being medically cleared. The old warrior looked at each of the young soldiers in turn. That was when I first understood what we were really fighting. Not an army or a government, but a species that views survival as the only victory that matters. They will sacrifice anything, including their own lives, to protect their people. Crix's voice was barely audible. How do you fight an enemy like that? Zekthara's smile was sad and knowing. That is the question that kept me awake for years. The answer is simple and terrible. You do not fight them unless you have no other choice, because they will make you pay a price for victory that you cannot afford. He raised his glass in another mock toast. To the defenders of Proxima Station, may their names be forgotten, so that other young fools do not try to match their courage. The 3 soldiers sat in stunned silence, their drinks untouched and growing warm in the cantina's recycled air. The bottle of spore wine was half empty now, and Zekthara's remaining hand had stopped shaking entirely. The 3 young soldiers across from him looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his words was pressing them down into their chairs. Around the cantina, other patrons had abandoned any pretense of minding their own business. Everyone was listening to the old warrior's tales. You want to know the difference between fighting other species and fighting humans? Zekthara asked, pouring himself another drink. Other species have soldiers and civilians. Humans have people who are fighting and people who are not fighting yet. Vex's tentacles had gone completely still. What do you mean? New Sparta, Zekthara said simply. The name hung in the air like a curse. Several other patrons in the cantina went pale, and one quietly got up and left. A human colony world with 8,000 inhabitants. Farmers, teachers, miners, engineers, families with children who had never seen a weapon more dangerous than a hunting rifle. Crix leaned forward. That sounds like an easy conquest. That is what High Command thought. 100,000 coalition troops against 8,000 civilians. The operation was supposed to last 1 week. Capture the population centers, process the inhabitants for relocation, establish a coalition administrative zone. Zekthara's voice grew darker as he continued. We had complete orbital superiority. Our intelligence reports showed no military installations, no defense networks, no standing army. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives on a frontier world. So what went wrong this time? Zor asked, though he no longer sounded eager to hear the answer. The old Valthek warrior was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass as if seeing something that others could not. The humans had developed something they called the Berserker Protocol. We did not know about it until it was too late. It was a form of psychological conditioning that could turn anyone into a fearless warrior within hours. Conditioning? Vex asked. Chemical treatments combined with neural programming. They could take a schoolteacher who had never hurt another being and transform her into someone who would charge a tank battalion armed only with explosives. And they did it to everyone. Men, women, even the elderly. Zekthara took a long drink before continuing. The landing went perfectly. We secured the spaceport, established a command base, and began moving toward the main settlement. The colonists seemed to be evacuating ahead of us, which was exactly what we expected. Rational beings avoiding conflict. But they were not evacuating, Crix said, beginning to understand. They were positioning themselves. While we thought they were running away in panic, they were actually implementing a defense plan that had been prepared years in advance. Every building, every vehicle, every piece of equipment had been pre-rigged for combat. The cantina had grown so quiet that the sound of Zekthara's breathing seemed loud in the recycled air. The first sign that something was wrong came when we entered the farming district. The fields had been flooded with chemicals that ate through our armor. The irrigation systems had been turned into delivery mechanisms for poison gas. The automated farm equipment had been reprogrammed to hunt anything carrying coalition identification signals. That still sounds like normal defensive preparations, Zor said. Zekthara shook his head. Normal defenses are designed to delay an enemy or force them to retreat. These were designed to kill as many of us as possible, even if it meant destroying everything the humans had built. He paused to pour another drink, his movements slow and deliberate. But the real horror started when we reached the residential areas. That was when we encountered the Berserker Protocol in action. What did you see? Vex whispered. A human female, maybe 60 years old, charged our position carrying nothing but a kitchen knife. She moved like a trained assassin, but her eyes were completely empty. No fear, no anger, no emotion at all. Just pure purpose. Zekthara's voice became barely audible. She killed 3 of my squad mates before we brought her down. When we examined her body, we found neural implants that had been installed recently. The humans had voluntarily turned themselves into killing machines. The young soldiers exchanged horrified glances. This was beyond anything they had imagined possible. It got worse. We found children, some no older than 10 years, acting as scouts and messengers. They would run through active battlefields carrying intelligence reports, completely ignoring explosions and gunfire. Their parents had conditioned them to view death as just another duty to their community. "That is impossible," Crick said, his voice cracking. "No species would use their own children in warfare." "You still do not understand," Zekthara replied. They were not using their children. Their children were volunteering. The Berserker Protocol did not force anyone to fight. It removed their ability to feel fear or self-preservation. Every human on that planet chose to become a weapon. He took another long drink before continuing. By the 3rd day, we controlled most of the colony's infrastructure, but we had lost over 15,000 troops. The humans had turned their schools into fortress bunkers. Their hospitals became sniper nests. Their playgrounds were minefields. How did they maintain coordination without military training? Zor asked. Every civilian had basic tactical knowledge implanted along with the psychological conditioning. A baker could set up overlapping fields of fire as effectively as a trained soldier. A librarian could coordinate artillery strikes using farming equipment. They fought like they had been planning this war for decades. Zekthara's remaining hand tightened around his glass. The worst part was their complete disregard for conventional tactics. We expected them to try to minimize casualties, to preserve infrastructure, to fight for strategic objectives. Instead, they fought to kill as many of us as possible before they died. "How many of them survived?" Vex asked. The old warrior's laugh was bitter and empty. "Survived? None of them planned to survive. The Berserker Protocol included a final phase. When a human was too badly wounded to continue fighting, they would activate a dead man switch." "A what?" "Every colonist carried enough explosives to destroy a small building. When they were dying, they would crawl toward our positions and detonate themselves. They turned their own deaths into weapons." The cantina was completely silent now. Even the ambient noise from the station's system seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I watched a human mother hold her wounded child, while they both counted down to detonation. The child could not have been more than 8 years old. She was singing to him when the explosives went off. Zekthara's voice broke slightly, and he had to pause to compose himself. That was when I understood that we were not fighting an army or even a species. We were fighting an idea. The idea that death was preferable to surrender, that sacrifice was more important than survival. "How did the battle end?" Crix asked. "We won, technically. After 2 weeks, there were no more human life signs on the planet. We had achieved our objective of capturing New Sparta, but we had lost 37,000 troops doing it. Nearly half our invasion force." Zekthara finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. The colony was a smoking ruin. Every building had been booby-trapped. Every piece of equipment had been sabotaged. The humans had destroyed everything they could not defend rather than let us have it. "We captured a graveyard." He looked up at the 3 young soldiers, and they saw something in his eyes that would haunt them forever. That night, I sat in the ruins of what had been a school and tried to understand what I had witnessed. The walls were covered with children's drawings. Pictures of families, animals, flowers, normal things that normal children draw. "But," Vex asked, but mixed in with the innocent pictures were detailed tactical diagrams showing how to construct improvised explosive devices. The children had been learning mathematics and bomb-making in the same classroom. Zekthara poured the last of the wine into his glass. That was when I realized that humans do not separate war and peace the way we do. For them, every moment of peace is just preparation for the next war. Every civilian is a potential soldier. Every home is a potential fortress. He raised his glass in another toast. "To the defenders of New Sparta. May their sacrifice remind us that some enemies are too dangerous to defeat." The 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence, their earlier confidence completely shattered. Around them, the cantina slowly began to return to normal, but the weight of Zekthara's words lingered like smoke from a distant fire. The bottle was empty now, and Zekthara had called for another. The bartender approached nervously, setting down a fresh container of spore wine with shaking hands. Word had spread through the cantina about the old veteran's stories, and new patrons had quietly taken seats to listen. The three young soldiers who had started this conversation looked like they wished they could leave. But something kept them frozen in their chairs. "You think those stories are the worst of it," Zekthara said, his voice now carrying the weight of too much alcohol and too many memories. "Ground battles, siege warfare, civilian resistance. These are things that can be understood, even if they violate everything we know about civilized combat." He poured carefully, the purple liquid catching the dim light like liquid shadow. "But humans do not limit their madness to planetary warfare. They bring it with them into the void between stars." Vex's tentacles had been motionless for the past hour. "What do you mean?" "The Battle of Tau Ceti," Zekthara said simply. Around the cantina, several patrons went pale. One old Draknari veteran quietly moved to a table farther away, as if distance could protect him from the memories. The human deep space fleet. 300 ships trapped against the stellar graveyard with nowhere to run. Coalition High Command had planned the trap for months. Perfect positioning, overwhelming firepower, complete tactical superiority. Crix leaned forward despite himself. Surely 300 ships could not escape such odds. Escape? Zekthara laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. They did not try to escape. They did something that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. Something that violated the laws of physics and military doctrine. The old warrior paused to take a long drink. They flew their ships into a black hole. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's life support system seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself was stunned by the words. "That is impossible," Zor said finally. "No ship can survive the gravitational forces near an event horizon." "No ship can survive," Zekthara agreed. "But humans do not plan to survive when they are truly desperate. They plan to take their enemies with them." He stared into his glass, seeing something that existed only in his memory. The first ship to make the attempt was called the Indomitable Spirit, a heavy cruiser with 800 crew members. We watched on our sensors as it accelerated directly toward the black hole's event horizon. "What were they trying to accomplish?" Vex asked. "At first we thought it was suicide, a final act of defiance before defeat. Our tactical computers calculated that the ship would be torn apart within minutes. Then we realized what they were actually doing." Zekthara's remaining hand gripped his glass so tightly that his knuckles showed white through his scarred skin. They were using the black hole's gravity as a slingshot, accelerating to impossible speeds and using the gravitational distortion to change their trajectory. Half the fleet followed them in. "But surely most of them were destroyed," Crix said. 157 ships were crushed by tidal forces or lost in the event horizon. But 93 emerged on the other side of our formation, moving at nearly 30% the speed of light. The young soldiers exchanged confused glances. "How is that possible?" "Human engineering and human desperation," Zekthara replied. They had modified their ships with experimental gravity drives that could function in extreme gravitational fields. Technology that should have taken decades to develop, built in secret while they planned this suicidal maneuver. He took another drink before continuing. But the truly horrifying part was not the impossible physics. It was what they did with those 93 ships once they emerged behind our lines. "What did they do?" Vex whispered. "They turned them into kinetic weapons, ships moving at relativistic speeds aimed directly at our command vessels. They were going to ram us at near-light velocity." Zekthara's voice grew quieter, forcing his listeners to lean closer. "Do you understand what happens when matter moving at 30% light speed impacts a stationary object? The explosion is equivalent to a small star going nova. A single human cruiser could destroy our entire task force. Did they succeed?" Zor asked. "They destroyed 47 coalition vessels before we could react. 47 ships and their crews turned into expanding clouds of plasma in a matter of seconds. But that was not the worst part. The cantina had filled with more listeners now. Veterans from a dozen different species sat in absolute silence, remembering their own encounters with human tactics. The worst part was listening to their final transmissions. As each ship accelerated toward its target, the crew would broadcast their last messages. Not battle cries or threats, but songs, poetry, messages of love to families they would never see again. Zekthara's voice cracked slightly. "I was monitoring communications from the bridge of our flagship. One transmission came from a young human female, barely old enough to serve in their fleet. She was singing a lullaby that her mother had taught her, her voice calm and clear as her ship prepared to ram our heavy cruiser. What happened to her? Crix asked. She died along with everyone else on both ships when they collided. 800 human lives and 1,200 coalition lives
ended in a flash of light that could be seen from 3 star systems away. The old warrior finished his drink and immediately poured another. But even that was not the end.
The human ships that survived the ramming attacks did not try to escape. They stayed to fight a conventional battle against our remaining forces. How many were left? Vex asked. 36 ships against 214 coalition vessels. By any reasonable calculation, they should have surrendered or tried to flee. Instead, they formed a defensive formation and continued fighting. Zekthara touched his scarred face with his remaining hand. They had modified their remaining weapons to fire at maximum power with no safety protocols. Their energy batteries were running overload cycles that should have destroyed their own ships. They were burning out their equipment to maximize damage before they died. How long did they last? 6 hours. 6 hours of continuous combat against overwhelming odds. They destroyed another 31 coalition ships before the last human vessel finally went silent. The cantina was packed now, with beings standing along the walls to hear the old veteran's words. News of his stories had spread through the station, and everyone wanted to hear about the humans who had defied physics and reason. When the battle was over, we sent recovery teams to search the debris field. Standard procedure for intelligence gathering and prisoner rescue. What we found there still haunts me. What did you find? Zor asked. Human crew members who were still alive in the wreckage trying to detonate their ship's remaining weapon systems with their dying breaths. They had survived impacts that should have killed them instantly, and they were still trying to fight. Zekthara's voice became barely audible. One young human engineer had been crushed by debris that pinned him in place. He had no legs, no way to reach his control console. But he had used his own blood to draw targeting calculations on the wall next to him. When our boarding party found him, he was trying to activate a self-destruct sequence using voice commands. Did he succeed? No, but only because his ship's computer had already been destroyed. He died still giving commands to systems that could no longer hear him. The old warrior looked around the crowded cantina, his eyes meeting those of other veterans who nodded in grim understanding. That was when I first understood that humans do not fight wars the way other species do. They do not fight to win territory or resources. They fight to make their enemies regret ever threatening them. He raised his glass in another toast. To the crews of the human deep space fleet, may their names be remembered by those wise enough to fear them, and forgotten by those foolish enough to follow their example. The cantina erupted in nervous conversation as beings tried to process what they had heard. But the 3 young soldiers remained silent, staring at their untouched drinks and wondering what other horrors the old veteran had yet to share. The cantina was packed now, standing room only, with beings from across the galaxy listening to the old veteran's words. Zekthara sat at the center of it all, his scarred face illuminated by the dim lighting, his remaining hand steady as he poured from his 3rd bottle of spore wine. The 3 young soldiers who had started this conversation hours ago looked like different people now, their earlier confidence replaced by a haunted understanding. You want to know the real secret? Zekthara asked, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. You want to know why the Coalition agreed to a ceasefire when we had military superiority? When our fleets outnumbered theirs 10-1 and our technology was generations ahead of theirs? No one answered, but every being in the cantina leaned forward waiting for the revelation they all sensed was coming. It was not mercy. It was not war fatigue. It was not political pressure from the homeworlds. Zekthara's eyes swept across the crowd. It was fear. Pure absolute terror of what humans would do if we pushed them to true desperation. Crix's voice was barely a whisper. What do you mean? Every battle we won against them made them more dangerous, not less. Every defeat taught them new tactics. Every death radicalized their survivors. We were winning individual engagements while losing the overall war. Because humans adapt faster than any species in galactic history. The old warrior took a long drink before continuing. But the real turning point came when Coalition intelligence discovered what the humans were planning for their final defense. Not just of Earth, but of their entire species. Around the cantina, veterans from other conflicts nodded grimly. They had heard whispers of this. Rumors that were too terrible to believe but too consistent to ignore. Project Prometheus, Zekthara said simply. The name hung in the air like a curse. The humans had been developing weapons that violated every galactic warfare convention ever written. What kind of weapons? Vex asked, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Biological weapons designed to target specific alien DNA. Viruses that could wipe out entire species while leaving humans completely unaffected. They had samples of genetic material from every coalition member world. The silence in the cantina was absolute. This was beyond warfare, beyond anything any species had contemplated. But that was just the beginning. They had also developed AI viruses that could turn our own technology against us. Computer programs that could infiltrate coalition networks and cause our ships to fire on each other. Our own weapon systems would become their weapon systems. Zekthara's voice grew darker as he continued.